It's officially back. The Chaos storyline is now 100% canon to the Dark Aether story. And what does that mean? I mean, it literally means that 9, Voyage of Despair, all the Chaos maps are happening in the exact same universe that we saw Cold War and now Black Ops 6 take place in. So it's one big story now, in other words. Now, of course, the thing is, like, this isn't the first time we heard of this connection between these two stories. The first time was actually in Vanguard Zombies, out of all places. It was actually on Shinonuma Reborn, where we have a radio from Gabriel Kraft, which we're not going to get into him today. That's a separate video for a different day, but he mentioned someone called Alistair Rhodes. And Alistair Rhodes happens to be the one who kind of, like, started all the conflicts in that Chaos story, and is also the father of Scarlet Rhodes, who is obviously a playable character in the Chaos story. But it didn't end there. Also on that same map, Shinonuma Reborn, there's pretty much it's pretty much a Sentinel artifact was on that map, so you know that was a thing also. But it didn't stop there. There's actually the intro to Terminus actually hinted at an order, which a lot of people, myself included, theorized that maybe they're talking about the order from the Chaos story. But now that all seems completely 100% confirmed, because now we have the ending to Terminus where we see this. And yes, that is literally a Sentinel artifact. And in fact, we're going to be using that, but back to that later. And there's also the mention of not only the Sentinel artifact, but also something called Prima Materia. And the fact that they mentioned Prima Materia and didn't call it something else is so fascinating to me. And I don't think people are really understanding how big of a difference that is, that they're not calling it something else like Ethereum. Now, of course, to understand what we're probably going to be using this stuff for in the story going forward, we first need to understand what is Prima Materia and what are Sentinel artifacts. Now, believe it or not, we're actually going to start with Prima Materia, because Prima Materia is actually more important than the Sentinel artifacts. In fact, the Sentinel artifacts don't exist unless there's Prima Materia. Now, the story of Prima Materia is a fascinating one, and it's kind of in its name, because Prima Materia is actually Latin, and what that means in English is actually first matter. And this gives you an idea of where it comes from, because the first time it was ever discovered was actually by very ancient civilizations. And when they discovered it, they realized right away it was very powerful. Now, how powerful? We never really got to see the full power of Prima Materia. We saw little glimpses here and there, but people like to compare it to 115 from the old story, or even Ethereum from the current story. But potentially it could be even more powerful, because you have to keep in mind, it wasn't scientists or doctors who studied and figured out just how to use this stuff in the best possible way. Instead, it was priests, magic men who used this stuff, and it seemed more supernatural. And we'll get a glimpse at least one time where we saw the power of Prima Materia later, to give you an idea at least how powerful it really was. Now, of course, the problem with this is when the ancient civilizations discovered it, is that there wasn't a lot of it. And this led to a lot of wars between kingdoms and empires trying to monopolize on all of its powers, a story we've seen over and over again. And some people of that time saw that it was tearing the world apart, and 9 specifically of them decided to do something about this. And this is where the group called the 9 appeared. Now, to be clear right away, the 9 and the Order are two different things. We'll get to the Order in a little bit, but for now, the 9 is just a group of 9 people who's trying to pretty much save the world, right? And how they decide to do this is that somehow, they don't explain this, they got all the Prima Materia to themselves and also all the knowledge of it. But instead of just trying to destroy it or hide it forever, they decided that maybe the people of their time aren't worthy of them. Humanity may not be worthy of it now, but maybe someday in the future, humanity will learn how to use Prima Materia for the better of everybody. And instead of tearing the world apart, it would make the world a better place. But they knew that they wouldn't be there to decide when humanity would finally be worthy of that, because of course they were going to eventually die. And of course, this is when they created the Sentinel artifacts. And they in fact made 9 in total, because how they decided to do this is that between the 9 of them, they would all hold one piece of knowledge from the Prima Materia, and they would lock that piece of knowledge behind each of their individual Sentinel artifacts. Now, of course, you couldn't just get a Sentinel artifact and now you have that knowledge. Instead, you also needed a key. But you have to be careful, because if you activated this key with the Sentinel artifact, this would start a trial. And this trial was to test if you were worthy. And when you started this trial, you had one of two outcomes. You either died and failed, or it found you worthy and it gave you its knowledge. Now, of course, there's some gray areas to that which we'll see in a little bit, but that was at least the idea of them. And this is what we literally see happen on every single map in the Chaos story. Just trial after trial. On Voyage of Despair this happens, and Dead of the Night it straight up happens again. But then we also see something strange happen on Ancient Evil, where a trial has just not ended because it was started by people from the ancient Greece in ancient Delphi, but because they didn't die, but also they weren't found worthy, they were trapped in that trial for thousands of years. But the one that is most interesting out of all of them is 9, because you have to understand, our playable characters, Bruno, Shaw, Scarlet, and Diego, they weren't actually at 9. Instead, they drank a hallucinant to relive the lives of these gladiators. And this is something that the 9 overlooked, but the Order, yes, now they're coming to play, were able to exploit. Because the Order knew that they weren't going to be found worthy of doing the trial, or just didn't want to risk dying. So instead, they decided to use someone else. Now, keep in mind, the events of 9 take place during the Roman time. In fact, this is back where Rome controlled Egypt. That's where 9 takes place. And what they did is that they used gladiators to do the trial for them. And they sent hundreds of gladiators in there till finally some were found worthy. And of course, this is when you complete the Easter egg. And this is exactly what the 9 overlooked. Because even though those gladiators were found worthy, instead of those worthy ones having that knowledge, instead the Order got them and killed them before they could get that knowledge, and instead took that knowledge for themselves. And this is where we get a glimpse of the power of Prima Materia, because with only one of the 9 Sentinel artifacts in this knowledge of Prima Materia, the leader of the Order used this to pretty much become immortal. Because keep in mind, 9 takes place during the Roman period, yet he was still alive in 1918. So it seems like just at least with one piece of this knowledge, you're able to become immortal. That should give you an idea of how powerful Prima Materia is. And that was a lot to go over, but trust me, it was very much worth it, and I think that knowledge is going to benefit everyone who listened to it. But of course, this brings us to the story going forward, no longer looking back at just the Chaos story. Now, the thing I find most interesting about all of that was said is that when Strauss talks about it, he calls Prima Materia. He doesn't call it Ethereum. And in fact, he calls Prima Materia in the Sentinel artifact, he calls them alchemy, not science. And he's frustrated that we would even have anything to do with these because he's a man of science, not a man of alchemy and magic, that those things are. And this is fascinating because when I originally was thinking if they ever introduced the Chaos storyline back into the Dark Aether stories, that they're going to say, yeah, they called it Prima Materia, but really it was just Ethereum. And all those gods and magical supernatural beings, yeah, sure, they seem like that, but really they were just Dark Aether entities. But now the fact that Strauss is dead set on just them not being the same, it makes me think that they are two different things. And if that's the case, does that mean we're going to have like a sci-fi and magic story stuck together? Obviously, I imagine the sci-fi stuff is more important, but still, it's very interesting to see that there would still be that element there. And looking forward to what this could do for the story, I mean, we're going to be looking for a Sentinel artifact. Like, that's what we're going to be doing in the next map. And the idea is that we're going to use the power of that Sentinel artifact in order to help Samantha escape the Dark Aether. But the question is, how are we going to do that? Does that mean our next map, we're going to be doing a Sentinel artifact trial? Is that what we're going to do? We're going to go back to the Chaos days? Like, that would be crazy if we just, like, go find the Sentinel artifact and then we just activate a trial. That would be crazy. That would literally make this the Chaos storyline again, which would be interesting to say the very least. But this kind of brings me to another thing. Like, if they've already determined that Prima Materia is alchemy and Ethereum is sci-fi and two different things entirely, why exactly is it going to be something that could help Samantha escape the Dark Aether? That doesn't seem to make sense. And there's a couple explanations for this, is that, hey, maybe they are the same thing after all, Prima Materia and Ethereum, or at least some version of it. Or potentially, what if that Sam AI is not to be trusted, and maybe Richtofen has some sort of hold over it, and maybe we're doing Richtofen's bidding after all. But I guess that's all just for the future. But regardless though, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on everything we went over today. What was your thoughts on the tie-in between the two? What do you think is going to be brought over? What's going to be significant? Because there's a lot, honestly. Like, we just talked about the Chaos tie-in stuff. There's also the mention of Gable Craft and the Signet, which are also very interesting, and I'll make videos on them too. So just subscribe and be ready for when those drop. But regardless, there's a lot to look forward for the story, and I'm actually super hyped for it. But that's going to wrap it for me. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.